The Denver Broncos introduced their new coordinators and all of their coaches on Wednesday at the UCHealth Training Center. What is the energy like in Dove Valley right now? We also give accounts as to our takeaways from the press conferences and also what players have said about these coaches. There's a lot of excitement right now in Broncos country. You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day. The Denver Broncos' new coaching staff provides a lot of exciting energy here in Broncos country. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Thank you once again, Broncos country, for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can watch us here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. You can also listen to us on your favorite audio podcasting platform, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Sayre, Wednesday was a great day in Broncos country. A lot of excitement in the air, and fan base very excited. I can tell you this personally, players I've spoken to are super excited about this coaching staff. And we got a lot of information from Justin Outten, Nathaniel Hackett, Dwayne, Stukes, Ejiro Evero. And there's a lot of excitement brewing in Broncos country. Just the energy from these coaches. And disclaimer, before we continue on, yes, we all understand that the Broncos have to get on the field. We have to see the changes on the field in order for that to really mean something. But you can be excited right now leading up to the season.
You can be. I feel like it's safe to be excited about this group of coaches, Cody, especially after listening to the way all of them speak, just the way that all of them have, they articulate their scheme, their philosophy, all these different types of things. Ultimately, to me, leads to nothing but excitement. I mean, how could you not be excited? It's a vastly different, almost just a 180 from the previous coaching staff, just in terms of mentality. The previous coaching regime was all about experience, and it was all about, this is the way that we do things. And it wasn't like they pitched it that way. And I don't think any coach on the previous regime wasn't interested in player development. Player development leads to their success. But at the same time, you just get the vibe that with this new coaching staff, the way that things are going to be different, the different type of communication, just the humility that we're going to talk about, that was talked about at the press conference. I feel like all of that is going to lead to a much better on-field product. And I can't wait to see, like you said, on the field is what matters. But man, the stuff they were saying at the press conference was really nice to hear.
It is, and there's one thing that stood out too. We heard a lot of player first, scheme second, which is very refreshing because it's all about the players that you have and building. How many times we said on the show, you have to build to what your players are good at. You have to build your scheme based around their strengths, and it sounds like that's going to be a priority here. I want to talk about Nathaniel Hackett. He took some time to introduce every single coach, not to mention the coordinators, but he mentioned every single position coach. He didn't even need to read off of a piece of paper. Like, he talked about what this coach brings to the table, how excited they are, what they're going to do, what their role will be within the organization, their experiences, how many years they've been coaching, and who they're going to be working with on the coaching staff as well. That right there, it's important. Like, relationships matter. And obviously for Nathaniel Hackett, I mean, everybody's talking about it, and all the coordinators are talking about how they knew Hackett and how they've grown to be close with him and what they admire about him as a coach and why they wanted to come to Denver. That stood out. But, one thing that Nathaniel Hackett talked about was the importance of collaboration, having fun in the process, but also teaching players. And he said something that was very interesting to me. He said, coaches a lot of times will say that they know everything. He's like, but we don't. He said, the reality is we have to continue to evolve. We have to continue to learn and grow with our players. That is so refreshing to hear, because there was a time where the Broncos had an offensive coordinator who said, I'm the coach, you're the players, I'll coach, you guys just play and execute. That rubs so many people the wrong way. It's so refreshing, and various players I've talked to, especially some offensive players, Noah Fant, so excited about these coaches here.
And I think that's exactly why they should be excited, right? Is that you're coming into a year with kind of a clean slate, obviously, as the players, but also this coaching staff isn't going to come in and say, hey, we know everything that there is to know about football. We've been here, done that. We've experienced all there is to experience, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like the best way that I can describe what the previous regime was doing, especially offensively, or maybe specifically offensively, is, hey, I've got a round hole and you're all a bunch of square pegs. So let's figure out a way to make it work. I feel like this is going to be totally adaptable. I feel like obviously the coaching staff that's in there right now with Nathaniel Hackett specifically, just that attention to detail and the willingness to learn and grow. As in any form of leadership, especially when you're talking about the NFL, where man, I mean that's one of the highest levels of leadership that you can get to as an NFL head coach. The process to get there is grueling in any level of leadership. If you're not growing, you're plateauing. And to me, if you're plateauing, you're not learning, you're not doing anything to get better. So for Nathaniel Hackett to come out and say that is really significant to me, Cody, just because, as a leader and as somebody who leads other people, you get this as well. If you're not growing, who's going to want to follow you? If you're not getting better at your craft, who's going to want to follow you? I just love the fact that he's coming in and saying, you know what, we're going to keep growing as coaches. We're going to keep continuing to learn. And the players, we're going to bring them along with us. We want to bring them into that success. We don't necessarily just want to stay here and the players are down here and just kind of bridge that gap. They want to bring the players up to that level. So I love the way that he put it. I love the way that he talked about the other coaches. Every time you hear Nathaniel Hackett, you get excited.
Well, it's all about relationships, right? And the collaborative nature. Like we heard a lot about collaboration. We heard a lot of these coaches talking on Wednesday at the UCHealth Training Center in the press conference about it's going to be a group effort. It's a we, not me mentality. So there was one, relationship is important, but there's another word that stand out. You touched on it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, humility, Cody. I mean, humility is the way forward. If you're in any arena, if you're trying to step over somebody to get to where you're going, ultimately, I feel like you're going to reap what you sow in that way. I just don't feel like that's the right way to do business in any regard. Of course, a lot of people will say like nice guys finish last. A lot of people will wonder about, well, how is Nathaniel Hackett's personality type going to really translate if you go on a 3-game losing streak? I think one of the key things that was mentioned, Cody, is that what Justin Outten talked about, where Hackett's not the type of guy that's going to tell you what you want to hear. It's what you need to hear. And as coaches in a collaborative environment, you have to have the humility to be able to hear what you need to hear in order to get better, as opposed to your buddy just telling you what you want to hear because he wants to remain your buddy. There's going to be tension. There's going to be tension in these close relationships. But man, just like any family, just like any brother sister relationship, father son, mother daughter, whatever you want to compare it to, you're going to have times where you fight. You're going to have times where you disagree, but how you push through that with those close-knit relationships and humility, I think is going to ultimately lead to on-field success. That's just the way that I see it. That's kind of just how I operate. I really resonate on that frequency. So that's what I love to hear, humility, and they talked about it, and they're going to emphasize it. I absolutely love it.
I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper on this too, and also look ahead to the Broncos offense. We heard from Justin Outten, and he spoke several things, especially about Drew Lock. He was asked a question about Drew Lock, and for some reason, people are also misinterpreting that. We'll address that coming up here in just a moment, Broncos Country. But let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode of the Locked On Broncos podcast. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam with pro and college hoops ongoing as we speak. From the latest odds, totals, player performance props, BetOnline is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs here in 2022, and BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to Olympic coverage and information. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn a little bit more about the trends and the action with BetOnline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we get into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, Broncos Country, once again, we just want to say thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. Both Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we appreciate being able to interact with all of you in Broncos Country, whether you agree with us, whether you disagree with us. Let's always have a civil conversation. I always think that's the most important thing, especially here in the YouTube comments and also on Twitter. It can get a little toxic sometimes. We have no time for that. But Sayre, kind of building off the coaching staff, the conversation you talked about regarding humility. And I can tell you this, as a former coach, I was on a staff for 8 years and I went through 2 different head coaches. And right. So with that, you have new coaches that come in that they bring upon. It's all about relationships. And we all grew together as coaches. Like we had to become, we're entrenched in it. Like we're in the grind together, just like we're expecting the players to be in the grind together with it. There were times where we as coaches had tension, like tension was building up during a losing streak. Things weren't going well. Like you get these ideas, you have different philosophies, but you talk about it, you collaborate, as you mentioned there. That's what coaching is. It's not just sunshine and rainbows. There's times you're going to have disagreements with guys on your staff here. But at the end of the day, it's not about what's in the best interest of you as the coach or you as an assistant coach. It's about what's the best interest of the organization, what's in the best interest of the players. For the coaches, really, it's about the players and what's in the best interest of them. And you're going to have some disagreements sometimes. But at the end of the day, like, you know what you do? You talk about it, you hash it out, and you go get a beer, have beer, or you go get dinner together. Like, that's exactly what coaching is. I think a lot of people have these misinterpretations as to like coaching is just like this plateau. It's super easy, and all you got to do is just call plays. It is relationship building, and that is so important. So we got to hear a little bit from Justin Outten, the new Broncos offensive coordinator. Now we know Nathaniel Hackett will call plays, but one thing that stood out to, he did say this offense will require 11 men to step their foot and their pride aside to play as one, which is super important, right? We preach that all the time as coaches. It's all about the team. It's the we, not me mentality. And you have to kind of get that out of guys. And like, I think for some players, you always see this anytime you have a brand new coaching staff. You have to get some of that me stuff out of certain players and transition that to we. And I'm not sure who that is right now on the Broncos roster, but that's going to be a process that does happen. It's normal. I mean, this is what happens with every team in the NFL. So I'm excited about that. But there was something he also said too about the system for this Broncos offense and what it needs.
Well, and I think it really goes perfectly with everything that you just said. It goes completely in alignment with requiring 11 men to step foot, put pride aside, play as one. He said for the system to run the way it should be, everyone has to just dedicate their time and their effort into the good of the team. Everyone has a responsibility, no matter if you're the starter or the backup. And that really reminds me of an interview that I heard from Nathaniel Hackett. So we know these are shared perspectives, Cody, because back when he was still with the Packers, Nathaniel Hackett talked about, how you coach every single player on the team like they're going to be a starter for you. And that's because over the course of the NFL season, how often do we see even some of your practice squad guys, they're going to start games for you. So you have to coach everybody the same. You have to get everybody on the same page. And we see the proof. The proof has been in the pudding for a team like the Green Bay Packers. You're able to put a player like Allen Lazard, a former undrafted free agent, into your lineup, and he racked up, I think, 8 or 9 touchdown catches last season. So that's not to say that he's not talented. What it is to say is that an undrafted player playing on a team that has neglected the wide receiver position gets treated like a starter in practice, gets treated like a starter in OTAs, in minicamp. And he has those expectations put on him that, hey, you might be the guy at some point, and they coach him like that. And what happens? He gets in and he becomes a staple in their offense. And so I just think that that's something that's so important to me. And I think it's really important too, Cody, for a player like Drew Lock, because the coaching staff clearly did him no favors. I know people are going to try to jump in the comments and talk about how we've always been biased towards Drew Lock and this and that and the other. But at the same time, he is one of the only quarterbacks on the roster right now. Teddy Bridgewater is not on the roster. No other quarterback besides Brett Rippon is on the roster. And even Rippon might be a restricted free agent. I can't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But Drew Lock is on the roster. So what he said about Drew Lock, I think, is really, really important as well.
When he said he's got a powerful arm and he's done a really good job as far as using his legs and being an athlete, as far as that, and I quote, I want to see how he fits in the system a little bit more once he gets the playbook under him, and then we'll go from there. That's not like a ringing endorsement. That's not a ringing indictment on Drew Lock. That's just the middle ground analysis from a coach that says, hey, he's got this, but we don't know yet. We'll see. And look, that's all it is. Like, Drew Lock's still under contract. And here's the deal. There's Broncos fans that don't want any part of Drew Lock, and I understand that. There's Broncos fans that want a lot of Drew Lock. Like, you want to just see the guy get put in a position to succeed, right? And maybe he does. Maybe here with this staff, he does. There's no guarantee of that, though. So it's like, okay, we have to focus on Sayre. Yesterday's episode, we got a trade proposal from Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers. A lot of people in the comment section are like, stop talking about Aaron Rodgers. The Broncos, you guys need to focus on the NFL draft. It's like, how can we focus on the NFL draft when realistically the Broncos' plans right now are contingent upon the domino when Aaron Rodgers decides whatever he's going to do, whether he's going to play in Green Bay, whether he's going to retire, whether he wants to go elsewhere. everything is going to be contingent upon waiting on him before Denver can actually make any moves. So it's like, that's what we're supposed to talk about here. We're not trying to peddle content for the sake of content. We have to talk about things that are going on that are relevant to the team. And Denver simply, we can't look ahead to the NFL draft right now for Denver just because we don't know what's going to happen in free agency. So I understand the frustration. People are tired of hearing about Aaron Rodgers. I understand Broncos country. Sayre and I both understand. But as long as it's relevant, it's something we have to touch on. And we promise we're not going to be overbearing. We're not going to create no hot take BS, clickbait BS for you guys to have to consume. We're just going to talk about just based on our thoughts as to what's happening. That's it. And I feel like I had to get that off my chest here. I don't know why, Sayre. I went on a little bit of a tangent there. But in terms of that, too, another thing for the Broncos offense, and this is something that Outten put the importance on, winning the turnover battle. Because the Broncos, when they'd get takeaways on defense, the offense often at times would turn the ball over or not convert on that. It's so important to win the turnover battle.
It really is. He brought up the fact that when you're +1 in a given game in the turnover differential, your win percentage shoots all the way up to 72%. When you're 80% or above, the win percentage, or when you have +2 in the turnover differential, you're over 80% chance to win the game on a given game. So just any given week, +1 or +2 in the turnover differential. I think any of us who watch football, we understand you don't want to lose the turnover differential. But it was kind of intriguing to see just the stark, here's the hard numbers on, if you're +1, you have a 72% chance of winning a game. I think any of us would take those odds, right? And that starts with the quarterback position. Of course, that's been a huge problem of Drew Lock's in the course of his career, is just being careless with the football. On the other side of things, that has been the complete opposite with Aaron Rodgers. Who has been just an absolute machine when it comes to not turning the ball over. He barely ever... How often do you ever see Aaron Rodgers get the ball stripped from his hand? And how often do you really ever see him throw interceptions? So, and to your point, Cody, to talk about him, there's so many other people in NFL media talking about Aaron Rodgers and the Denver Broncos that us here, we're sitting here we're waiting for something to actually happen. So for the listeners and for us that get to talk about this, which it is a privilege and it's so much fun, but we're also just on pins and needles waiting for something to happen so we can not speculate anymore, so we can talk about what's actually happening or what's actually going on with the roster. So speculation is fun, but I get it. It becomes tiring, but at the same time, how are the Broncos going to get to that point where they're winning the turnover battle in any given game? Because over the last couple seasons, that has really been the difference between this team being a playoff team and this team being a 7-9 at best in their 2 out of 3 Vic Fangio seasons. I suppose 7-10 this past season. So it's just, what do you got to do to get over that hump? The quarterback is the biggest thing. This coaching staff knows it. George Paton knows it. And obviously, Aaron Rodgers is the one domino to fall. Nothing else at the quarterback position is going to happen until Aaron Rodgers decides, I'm going back to Green Bay, I'm retiring, or I want to be traded.
I think you nailed it perfectly there. I think you summarized everything that everybody's feeling, and you put a logical touch on it, Sayre Bedinger. That's why I love you, man. That's why you're my co-host. You're the best in the business, my man. Love doing this with you, and I love that Broncos Country gets to share this thing with all of us. You love Broncos Country. I love the conversations, even the agreeing viewpoints, the disagreeing viewpoints. As long as people keep it respectful and civil, man, it's a good time for everybody here in Broncos Country. But how are the Broncos going to potentially win the turnover battle, and how can they turn things around? Special teams. We hear a little bit and we give our thoughts on obviously Ejiro Evero coming in as a defensive coordinator and Dwayne Stukes as the special teams coordinator. We share our thoughts on that coming up here in just a moment. But real quick, let me tell you, if you're a Colorado sports fan, we have a podcast for you. Outside of Lockdown Broncos, we have a Lockdown Rockies podcast. And I know everybody is waiting the MLB to return, obviously with the holdout that's going on right now. Obviously very frustrating there, but Chris Maselli has you covered as well with the Lockdown Avalanche podcast as the Avs are hoping to make a run for the Stanley Cup. Not to mention the Denver Nuggets right now are still playing really good basketball without Jamal Murray, without Michael Porter Jr. They could be getting them back. They just got DeMarcus Cousins back for the rest of the season. He's going to be there with Nikola Jokic. Check out the Locked On Nuggets podcast for more if you are a Colorado sports fan. As we jump into the fourth quarter on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, Sayre Bedinger, my co-host, is always joining me here on today's episode of the show. Everybody in Broncos Country, we just appreciate you for tuning in and taking time out of your day to listen or to watch us wherever you listen or whether you watch us, whether it's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting provider. We got to hear a little bit more from Ejiro Evero, as he is very close to Nathaniel Hackett, Dwayne Stukes, Both these guys coming off of a Super Bowl winning season as coaches with the Los Angeles Rams, which was really the holdup there. But, I want to focus here on special teams to start off. Dwayne Stukes, we all know the issue here for the Broncos special teams unit. It's been consistency, and it's been these areas where they've given up plays on one hand, and then they get a stop, and then they give up another big play. Dwayne Stukes flat out said, like, hey, it's all about consistency. We have to find a way to be more consistent. We have to be great teachers. And also one thing, too, he said, look, I'm not here to critique the last guy's job or whatever he did. He said, but, one thing that stood out to me is that Denver, when you look at it, they were ranked bottom in the NFL in terms of kick return average. We have to find a way to get a little bit of a spark on kick return, and that's about teaching guys the right technique in terms of blocking, especially with the rules where you can't double up and wedge block anymore. It's very hard to return. However, a lot of teams had success returning against Denver last year. So, I liked what I heard from Dwayne Stukes. Obviously, a lot of energy from him.
Absolutely. He just gives off that vibe that he's going to be a great players coach who gets the best out of his guys, especially on special teams. I feel like you have to have somebody who can get players fired up because you're going out there, you basically get one rep at full speed. And so you got to have a guy that can teach you, hey, this is exactly what you have to do, in this scenario or that scenario. So I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table, especially in terms of just identifying what kind of players will fit. I mean, he talked about the fact that there should be a lot of players already on this roster who could be great special teams guys, core special teams guys. But he did highlight the return game. I feel like that's an area, Cody, that we're going to see the Broncos emphasize this offseason. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like in terms of whether it's free agency, the NFL draft. Maybe you bring KJ Hamler into that role as soon as he's healthy. I don't know what that's going to be, but I do think that that's going to be a point of emphasis. And I like that. I like that a lot just because I feel like, you need some game-changing playmakers in that regard. But then Ejiro Evero, he talked about the fact that, man, if you were a player in last year's defense, what we're going to run going forward is probably going to look pretty darn similar in 2022 and beyond.
Well, you mentioned that their base defense will be the 3-4 defense. They're going to have various sub packages, nickel and dime. You're going to see a lot of different things. But one thing that stood out to me, we talk about players first, scheme second. He got into the nuts and bolts about, hey, this is what our defense will look like. There'll be carryover there. But he also said the scheme has got to fit your players. So he said that we're, as a staff, we're going to go back, we're going to sit, and we're going to evaluate everything and everybody, and we're going to tailor our scheme to what everybody does best. That is exciting. If you're a Broncos player, like, it's refreshing to hear, like, hey, they're actually going to do something. They're going to tailor what we do based on what we as a collective unit are really good at. And I'm excited to see what that's going to be, Sayre. I'm excited to see the different looks, but that's not the only thing that's got us excited about the Broncos preserving their same defense. Getting pressure on the quarterback was a big topic of discussion last year. We saw a lot of four-man rush, but what did Evero say about getting pressure on the quarterback?
Yeah, he talked about, if you're bringing 4 and it's not working, you got to bring 5. And if you're bringing 5 and it's not working, you got to bring 6. I feel like that was a huge area where there was kind of like a cap for Vic Fangio's defense, right? I mean, he wanted max coverage. He wanted to force a quarterback to have to read every single one of his reads, go through every one of his reads. And the pass rush, he was hoping, I think, for 4 or 5 guys to get home a majority of the time. We saw a bit of evolution there with guys like Alexander Johnson, and Josie Jewell getting sent on more blitzes in the passing game over the past couple of seasons. But I just feel like, man, the production off the edge just wasn't quite there. And it felt like the Broncos tried a lot, like even to the point of just like it was maddening during games to see sometimes like, why are they sending 4-man rush there? Why are they only sending 5 guys here? I feel like that's something that you do have to be adaptable. And as we've talked many, many times, even on this episode, you have to be adaptable to your players. And I think that that's something where the Broncos last year, right, their personnel, they traded Von Miller. You had Bradley Chubb out injured. You got to send more guys in the pass rush. You can't just hope that your next guys up are going to be able to get pressure with 4-man and 5-man looks. You've got to send additional guys. So I love that he said that. I love that he brought that up because he didn't directly say, hey, this is something that I think, Vic Fangio didn't do as well as he could have. But I think us in Broncos country who watched last season, we know and understand, having seen all 17 regular season games, that is and should be a clear emphasis area moving forward.
It absolutely has to. And one thing Evero touched on as well in his presser, he said, look, I'm the defensive coordinator. He's like, but I'm going to rely a lot on a lot of these guys here, the experience of Dom Capers. Talk about CP. CP's going to have ideas, going through their linebackers coach, just going through all the defense stuff. He's like, this is going to be a collaborative unit. It's not just going to be just me. It's what do these coaches need from me to help put our team in a position to succeed. That is something that I like because, look, as good of a defensive coordinator as Vic Fangio was, a lot of Vic Fangio was, this is what I'm doing, and this is how we are going to do it. Like, there was no input from other guys. It was Vic Fangio's defense and every facet of the imagination there, which very good defensive coordinator. But I like the idea of evolving a little bit, sending more pressure because pressure got home. That's how the LA Rams, that's how they won a Super Bowl. They turned the pressure on late in that game against Joe Burrow. I'm so excited to see what the Broncos decide to do here coming up in free agency, potentially the NFL draft, and just once we get to mini camp, OTAs, and much more. We're super excited about this coaching staff in Broncos country. How excited are you about the Broncos' new coaching staff, the energy that they have? Is it something that you're buying into, or are you waiting and seeing how the on-field product looks? Regardless, nobody can tell you how to feel as a Broncos fan. That's one reason why Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we do this podcast every single day is for you, the true Broncos fans that are out there in Broncos country. But with that said, that will wrap up today's episode, Locked On Broncos. We're going to continue our offseason preview, looking at various elements of this Denver Broncos football team. George Payton, Nathaniel Hackett getting ready for the NFL Scouting Combine next week. What might we learn? Well, we'll talk about that in the coming episodes here on the Locked On Broncos podcast.